Welcome to my launch history video for the Nintendo Wii. This story doesn't actually begin with Nintendo. This story begins with a third-party company called Gyration Inc. So let's find out how they planned to start a revolution. So I was always under the impression that Nintendo knew what the successor to the GameCube was going to be right from the start, but it actually seems like the concept for the Wii landed in Nintendo's lap at just the right time. So let me tell you about Gyration Inc. and the surprising path that they took to actually working with Nintendo in the first place. So Gyration Inc. is a company that's been around since 1989, and they invented all kinds of 3D motion sensing technology, mostly for use in things like mice for doing presentations on the PC, and before that they actually worked in the aerospace industry as well. It was founded in 1989 by a person called Tom Quinn, and his original concept for the company was to make motion-controlled devices that would allow you to more easily fly aircraft. And he developed the gyroscopic motion sensing technology, which would take 10 years from his concept in order to get the patent granted in 1999.
One of the most exciting things I just got off with is I'm the patent holder inventor of the motion controller that was licensed to Nintendo to make the Wii.
And one of the early examples of this technology being used is actually in a motion-controlled mouse called the Gyration Air Mouse. And it would be used for PowerPoint presentations, and you could also kind of use it like a Wii remote to move windows around on the screen and to zoom in and out. And in fact, looking at this demo here, it does actually seem very similar to the technology that was used in the Wii remote. But in 2001, Gyration Inc. wanted to move away from the business aspects and try and focus their attention towards video games. And the first company they went to try and pitch their ideas was actually Microsoft. So they did a pitch in 2001 to Microsoft's Steve Ballmer. And you may know him as the very, very energetic CEO who is very famous these days for that developer conference from Windows 2000.
Developers, 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 developers.
And he actually loved the idea, and he managed to set Gyration Inc. up with a second pitch to some of the executives at Microsoft. But that second pitch didn't go quite as well as the first. In fact, the pitch went so badly and the people in the room were so rude that one of the executives in the room actually came up after the pitch and apologised to Tom just for the rudeness of the staff at this meeting. So they wrote Microsoft off, that just wasn't happening, and they turned their attention to another video game company, which was Sony. So they were thinking about Nintendo around this point, but they also knew that Nintendo was struggling a lot, not just financially, but also in terms of management, because there were some rumours going around that Yamauchi was going to step down as president, and they didn't really know what was going to happen. So instead of going to Nintendo, they turned their attention to Sony, and a meeting was set up with Ken Kutaragi, who was actually the developer of the SNES sound chip and the SNES PlayStation before moving on to becoming the developer for the PlayStation series of consoles. And it also sounds like this presentation didn't go very well at all either. Here's a direct quote. "We were in a tiny little room with a big PC projector, and Kutaragi comes in, introduces himself, sits down, and I swear this is true, he closed his eyes the moment I started showing my pitch. He never opened them until I had finished." And that is just incredibly rude and incredibly demoralising for the people doing this pitch. So Sony was off the cards as well, and I have no idea why the companies were being so rude about this fairly interesting technology, which a few years later Sony and Microsoft would both be trying to copy and come up with their own variations on. But anyway, let's move forward a bit later on to September that year in 2001, when they finally got a meeting with Nintendo. And this really is an incredible series of events that managed to pan out absolutely perfectly for Gyration. So in 2001, like the rumours suggested, Yamauchi stepped down as president of Nintendo, and in his place was actually put a board of directors. And one of the people who was one of the members of this new board was a man called Atsushi Asada. And he was actually friends with someone who worked at Gyration Inc. and managed to set them up a pitch meeting in 2001 in September, and Asada was actually there in the meeting room too. And here's some more quotes from how that meeting went. About 20 minutes into my pitch, which was roughly the same one I gave to Microsoft and Sony, Asada stopped things and asked if he could have a moment to speak with his people. I was thinking, here we go again. They started talking, and right in front of me, it was going into this really heated discussion. I was told by Yoshida, who was also in the room, that some executives were resistant to the idea of motion controls, while others were completely sold by it. And then, in the middle of this debate that was getting louder and louder, Asada barked something, and then there was total silence. That was it. He decided to license our patents for motion control, as well as buy some of the company. So the fortunes really were in Gyration's favour, and they left that meeting much wealthier than they were before, and now also as a partner for Nintendo. And they were immediately set to work to come up with a new controller for their next generation console. The original design for what would become the Wii Remote was designed by a man at Gyration called Matt Prester, and he very kindly actually shared the original design documents for what would become the first of many, many prototypes for the Wii Remote. So the idea they came up with to begin with was this breakaway gyropod concept, and as you can see, it comes in two different halves, but they actually attach together to form a standard game controller. And if we take a look at some of the other slides here that they showed off to Nintendo around this time, you can actually see that it already controls very much like how the Wii Remote would end up controlling in this demo here of a first-person shooter, where you actually use your hand in order to control the gun, which of course was one of many selling points for the system. And here's some other prototype designs as well. You can see the first one here is obviously based on their existing mice that they used for the presentation technology. There's also this boomerang shaped one called the Sidecar, and the two-handed hybrid controller, which is basically just a regular controller with one side shorter than the other. There's also the traditional break-apart version, which is the two connecting together but also being able to be used freehand as well, and a bunch of other really interesting concepts and sketches and 3D renders too. It's so amazing that I managed to find this information out there online, so I really hope you appreciate seeing this very early start for the Wii Remote. And now, once those original concepts were out there, Nintendo themselves got to work with making a whole bunch of different concepts and prototypes for basically playing around with motion controlled gaming. So let's start off with this star controller here in the middle, which I just find absolutely fascinating and also hilarious at the same time. So Nintendo actually showed this off back in 2006 when they were talking about the development of the Wii Remote. There's an excerpt here from this book called Nintendo Magic: Winning the Video Game Wars, and in it, they discussed this star controller, so let me read a little bit here because I think it's very interesting but also kind of funny. It had a large star-shaped button in the centre surrounded by three smaller buttons and used internal accelerometers that let the player control by tilting it forwards, backwards, left and right. And its bizarre appearance earned it the nickname Cheddar Cheese from the development team. It was admittedly simple and easy to understand, but also far too garish. Miyamoto's team met with around 40 game developers within Nintendo bi-monthly to hear their opinions. They complained that it was totally unsuited to traditional games like Mario and Zelda. So that's a really interesting piece of Nintendo history, but there's so much more to go into here. They also showed off an interesting controller which would actually have twisted in the centre, as well as one that does actually look fairly similar to the eventual Wii Remote design, and this really weirdly shaped one, which is kind of just like a Dreamcast controller without a screen in the middle. And what's even cooler about these prototype controllers is the fact that in the Nintendo Museum that opened up last year in Kyoto, they actually have these on display as well, and I don't think these photos were meant to be taken, so hopefully Nintendo doesn't shut this video down, but I actually found some photos from the museum where you can actually see all of the prototype controllers for the Wii in a glass display cabinet, and not only does it have the cheddar cheese star, it also has an even bigger star which was on a blue base, also surrounded by three buttons as well, which I assume would work in exactly the same way. There's also a few other interesting concepts here that weren't shown off originally in 2006. There's some very strange ones which just feature discs. There's one that looks like a fidget spinner that just has 3 discs on it. There's another one that's like a plus control pad which has 2 discs on either side and maybe some buttons on the top and the bottom. And then there's one which is just 2 discs in a rectangle. I have no idea what they were really thinking with these designs, but it's very interesting to see nonetheless. And there was also this really interesting concept which I think would have actually done really well if it did come out. It's basically a GameCube controller design with a slot in the middle to put the Wii Remote. So basically, instead of plugging the classic controller in like you do with the final Wii Remote, you would actually dock it into the controller itself and then just be able to play games just like you would do on the GameCube, which I think is really interesting. And they also showed off a few different variations of what would become the final Wii Remote, and I also found the very first ever prototype version of this as well, which actually featured a really big analog stick right in the centre of the Wii Remote and no buttons on the bottom at all. And when they did finally settle on that wand-style Wii Remote design, it was originally designed to work with the GameCube, and I actually found some patents that show that working with the GameCube here, and you can see that it would have actually used the Wavebird controller attachment in order to wirelessly connect it to the GameCube here. And you can also see a very different design for what would end up becoming the sensor bar here too. There's also a few other patent designs here as well, one for that slot-in GameCube style controller, but also another really interesting one which we'll get back to in the next video when I talk about the Wii U, and this would have actually given the Wii Remote its own screen on the top as well, which is just absolutely fascinating that they were thinking about this so long before the Wii U came out, but that's for the next episode. And here's some more patent ideas for what would become the Wii Remote, and also the classic controller, and a very early glimpse into what would finally become the Wii Zapper as well. And it seems like the nunchuck attachment didn't go through quite as many revisions. There's a few here from the Nintendo Museum, and there's one here in this drawing, and here's a look at that GameCube version of the Wii Remote, nunchuck and sensor bar, which were actually used for developers to build their games for the Wii, and because the Wii is basically just an enhanced GameCube, people were actually making their games using dev kit versions of the GameCube that just had extra RAM, and a few extra chips that were added onto it to make it the equivalent of a Wii. So it's really interesting to see these early versions of what would become the final controller. And bear in mind, while all this was going on, Nintendo had made no official announcement regarding what the revolution would actually be, or what its interesting controller concept would be either. So let's move forward to 2002, when Satoru Iwata became president. The first thing that Iwata did in 2002 when he became president was actually to change the trajectory that Nintendo was going by deciding not to focus on competing with high-end graphics and furthering the technology, but instead to look at a new blue ocean strategy, as he called it, which was basically trying to get people who aren't gamers to join in the gaming community and to just grow gaming in general. He also set up a new executive board for group decisions as well, and there's an interview here from 2004 just before the launch of the DS that kind of explains his concept here, and also gives the very first sneak peek into his ideas with the Revolution 2. So he said in this 2004 interview that the industry has been able to build up its success by making games more gorgeous and more complicated, but unfortunately I just can't predict if it can keep going on with that direction for a very long time from now. Come to think of it, whatever future product Nintendo might make, it's not the small changes we're going to be introducing. Everything Nintendo is going to create shall become very varied and revolutionary. If we cannot come up with that kind of great change, I'm afraid people are going to get tired of it pretty soon. But at the same time, while this Blue Ocean strategy was slowly coming into effect, work on the successor to the GameCube was already in the planning stages over at ATI, and we can actually find out that thanks to some leaked documents from the Giga Leak, that the next Nintendo GameCube, as it was known back then, was actually just going to be more of the same. It was going to be a HD-ready console that just did exactly what Nintendo was trying to move away from, and it was planned to compete directly with the Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3. And you can see some of the slides here. They were saying it was a true next-generation console, and it would only be differentiated from its competitors by price point. And it was going to be a dedicated gaming device, seamlessly connect with portable devices, and the most interesting thing from this presentation, they were actually planning in 5 years' time, so in 2010, to make a portable version of this next Nintendo GameCube. And they even went as far as scheduling out the roadmap over the next 2 years until the system would launch. But we all know that plan didn't come to fruition, and Iwata did get his way, and from then on, everything at Nintendo changed. So, to put into perspective some of the struggles that Nintendo was facing by just continually chasing the same thing every single generation, you can see the sales numbers here, and they are dire if you look at it like this. Every single generation without fail did far worse than the one before it. The NES sold overall 62 million units by the end of its life, the Super Nintendo sold 49, the N64 only sold 33 million, and the GameCube despite everyone's love for the system who did buy it, only ended up making 22 million sales. Nintendo had to do something about this, or they could already see their next console selling even worse than the ones that had come before. And Nintendo's future finally changed for the better in 2004 with the release of the Nintendo DS. Originally not released as a true successor to the Game Boy Advance, but more as a third pillar, as they called it. They were just trying to hedge their bets as to whether this Blue Ocean strategy would pay off or not, but of course it did. And we have a great quote here from Iwata at E3 2004, a few months before the launch of the DS in Japan. He went on to say here that the DS can tell you how serious we are about changing the way games are played. He also first mentioned Revolution as being Nintendo's next home console, and he went on to say that same word, different, also defines our approach for our next home console. It won't simply be new, it won't simply include new technology. Technology is good, but technology is not enough. Today's consoles already offer fairly photorealistic expressions. Simply beefing up those graphics won't let most of us see a difference. So what should a new machine do? For both game creators and game players, a new machine must do much more. They must offer an unprecedented play experience, something no other machine has delivered before. Work on Revolution is well underway. When you see it, you will be excited because you will experience a gaming revolution. Nintendo felt very optimistic about the future of the company around this time, and rightfully so. So let's move forward now to 2005 and let's see where Nintendo's Revolution went next. The next time the Revolution was mentioned was in an interview in March 2005, again by Iwata, and he had this to say. Already you're seeing changes in Nintendo DS, which has a microphone, input pen and touchscreen. We have a number of candidates for a new Revolution interface, but are not ready to reveal them yet. All I can say right now is that whatever we choose will be intuitive and easy to use for everyone. So around this time, they were still experimenting with all of those different prototype versions of the controller that I showed off earlier in the video. Next was a GDC talk, also in March that year, and at this talk, he mentioned that they were working with IBM to create the Revolution's processor, which was codenamed Broadway, because Broadway is the capital of live entertainment, and with ATI they were developing the graphics chip, which was codenamed Hollywood, because that is the capital of movie entertainment. And with the Revolution, they wanted to create a new capital of interactive entertainment. Whatever that means. He also said for developers at the show that the Revolution will be a place where the best ideas, not necessarily the biggest budgets, will win. Which we can see looking back that he was referring to the fact that it would actually be a lot easier to develop for the Revolution, considering it wasn't using HD or some of the more modern techniques with game development. It was using tried and tested technology from the previous generation, which developers were already very much accustomed to. Next came E3 that year, and they were finally ready to talk a little bit more about the console, but they still kept some things under wraps, apparently intentionally, but I also feel like some things just weren't quite ready yet still. At this show, there was a lot of information shared about the Revolution, so I'll cover some of the more interesting bits right now. The most exciting thing, obviously, was the fact that they finally showed off what the console would actually look like. And they also mentioned the fact that it would be roughly the size of 3 DVD cases stacked together, and also that it would be able to play both new 12cm discs and GameCube games as well. Something else they announced at this E3, which wouldn't end up coming true, was the fact that it would also be able to play DVDs by buying an attachment which would go inside the console. That never ended up happening, but you can actually mod the Wii to play DVDs on it that way. And I actually did that at uni, and that's what I used to watch quite a few DVDs back then too. They also stated that it would use a very unique controller, but didn't elaborate any further than that. Another big thing that they were showing off at this event was the backwards compatibility, because not only would it be backwards compatible with GameCube games, which they hinted at in the Revolution logo, by the way, with the 2 different disc sizes, which I always really loved. I thought that was a really neat nod to the 2 styles of games it could play, but they also announced the Virtual Console for the first time as well. And they also announced a few new games for the system, even though they didn't really show anything. There was a kind of teaser for Metroid Prime 3, and you could see the ship in the background while he was talking about it, but there was no gameplay to be seen. He also mentioned that Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles Online would also be coming to the Revolution. They also announced that they would be working on a variety of Wi-Fi enabled games for the console as well, and it would be able to easily connect to the internet as well. This E3 is also famous for the fact that Iwata announced that the next Smash Bros. Game would be coming to the system without actually giving any of the developers a heads up first. It was actually only shortly before the show that he'd actually mentioned it for the first time to anyone. And there was also a lot of trouble behind the scenes with actually getting Sakurai back to work on Smash Bros., considering he'd just left HAL a few years earlier to start his own company and distance himself from all that, so Iwata must have been very persuasive for that to happen. But I'm glad it did, because I absolutely loved Brawl when it came out. He also mentioned at this show that next generation versions of Zelda and Super Mario were already underway. But he didn't show off the controller. That was one of the mysteries that was left on the table for now. But people wouldn't have to wait too long to find out finally what that controller was going to look like, because in September at the Tokyo Game Show that year, the controller was finally shown off to the public. And here's what that version of the Wii Remote looked like, very similar to the final version. There was only a few small differences here. Interestingly, they decided to have A and B on the controller twice, which I always thought was a very strange idea, and obviously for the final revision they changed those bottom lowercase A and B buttons to 1 and 2 instead, which make a lot more sense. Also, the power button was a slightly different shape, and so was the sensor at the top of the controller as well. But apart from that, they were pretty much finalised with the design. But I found out something else very interesting from this TGS event, and that is the fact that Satoru Iwata was actually banned from doing any further speeches at TGS because he didn't tell them he was going to announce the Wii Remote at this show. In fact, the slides that he presented for the event before it was on were completely different to what they ended up becoming, and he had to actually publicly apologise for putting on a different show to the one that ended up appearing at the event. He actually just said, "I'm sorry about that, but it felt like perfect timing." So all of that was just impromptu Iwata being Iwata and wanting to announce the Wii Remote because he was finally satisfied with it, I guess. I just thought that was a really nice tidbit of information from the show. Anyway, that's it from 2005. Now let's move forward to 2006 and the year the Revolution finally went on sale under a brand new name that not everyone was best pleased with. The new name for the Revolution, the Nintendo Wii, definitely came as a shock to a lot of people, me included, and that new name was announced on April 27th, 2006. And I remember when I first heard this, I was disgusted, I was horrified. I loved the name Revolution. I'd been reading about that name for the past 2 years, hyping myself up for their next console, and then they would change it to this weird word that didn't even make any sense. I was so confused, I was so upset, angry, I didn't even know what to feel, but obviously the name finally wore in and I became used to it over time, but my god, that was a bit of a shock to begin with. I'd be interested to know in the comments how you guys and girls felt when you first heard the name Wii. And then a few months later in May, it was finally time for the big reveal, E3 2006, and loads of news about the Wii, about the controller, how it plays, all of the launch games, all of the games coming soon, all of the third-party support. It was such an incredible show, and I remember rushing home from school so that I could watch this, and I was just glued to the screen for the whole 2-hour presentation while Nintendo was just announcing mind-blowing after mind-blowing new thing for the system. This is really what cemented me as a fan of Nintendo and of the Wii in general, and was also one of the catalysts for me starting this channel as well. So let's take a look at what Nintendo actually showed off that year at E3. In a scene that still gives me goosebumps to this day, Miyamoto took to the stage and started conducting with a Wii Remote in hand, and behind him, Mii characters playing different musical instruments and playing the Legend of Zelda theme tune. This would of course go on to become Wii Music, which is well known today as one of Nintendo's worst games they've ever made, but back then it was a very impressive showcase for one of many capabilities of the Wii Remote. After that, he would continue conducting as the gameplay on the screen behind turned into Excite Truck, which is one of my favourite games for the system, and then Red Steel, which is one of my favourite launch games as well. And then Reggie took to the stage, who people already absolutely loved at this point since his first appearance in 2004. And he announced a release date of Q4 that year, so there wasn't much longer to wait until people could get their hands on the console themselves. They then showed off one of my favourite game montages of all time, with the Wii logo bouncing around and turning into all of these different ways that you could use the controller. And throughout these teaser trailers here, they showed off Wii Sports for the first time, Excite Truck again, they showed off Super Mario Galaxy for the first time during these trailers too. They showed off Aeroplane, which would eventually make it into Wii Sports Resort, Metroid Prime 3 for the first time properly, Wii Play, they showed off the table tennis minigame, they showed off WarioWare Smooth Moves for the first time, more gameplay of Red Steel, and finally, confirmation of the Wii version of The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess. So what an amazing range of games right off the bat, but there was even more to come. Reggie then spent a little bit of time in between this and the next set of game trailers to explain the name Wii, and to try and get people a little bit more accustomed to it.
Okay, next, the name. First, we want to thank everyone who wrote good things about it the day you heard it. Both of you. But seriously, the response didn't surprise us at all. At first, every distinctive name sounds strange. Did you love Lexus the first time you heard it? How about IKEA? How about Google? Change is good. Wii from Nintendo means just what it sounds like. Wii. It's the sound of inclusion. The sound of every gamer you know and every new gamer who's going to join us.
And then there was another sizzle reel full of third-party games for the system, who Nintendo said had finally got back on board, and they showed off so much stuff here. There was Dragon Ball, Disaster Day of Crisis, Dragon Quest, Fire Emblem, SpongeBob SquarePants, Disney's Cars, SD Gundam Breaker, Tony Hawk's Downhill Jam, Sengoku Action, Necronasia, Elebit, Rayman 4, which of course would go on to become Raving Rabbids, Super Swing Golf Pangia, Sonic Wildfire, which the audience cheered for, which would of course go on to become Sonic and the Secret Rings, Project Hammer, which was a cancelled Nintendo game, which I'd love to talk more about in the future, Final Furlong Revolution, One Piece Unlimited Adventure, Madden Football, and Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, which they'd announced the year previously. They also talked a little bit about the online features of the Wii, including a new service called Wii Connect 24, where the Wii would go into a low-powered standby mode and developers would be able to beam new updates to games directly to the console while it was asleep. That didn't quite end up happening, but I do have a lot of very fond memories of receiving different messages from companies and friends while the system was asleep, and obviously that blue pulsing light that came on when there was a new notification was really exciting back then. And towards the end of the show, they also brought up one winner of a competition up on stage to be the first person in the world to play the Nintendo Wii, and they got up on stage with Miyamoto, Iwata and Reggie to play the world's first game of 4-player tennis in Wii Sports. And then at the show floor that year, they had the biggest set of titles ever at 27 playable titles, and the queue for Nintendo's booth was just insane this year, with people waiting over 4 hours just to be able to get inside and get their hands on a Wii remote and try out some of these games for themselves. And that was it for announcements and pre-release things. Now Nintendo was turning their attention to the worldwide launch, and in 2006 it launched in 4 different regions. Let's take a look at what some of those launches looked like around the world. Starting of course with America on the 19th of November, and Nintendo actually closed 44th Street in New York to put on a 4-hour block party where you could play Wii Sports in the street on these demo consoles, and there was music playing, there was a DJ.
You're here in New York City and we're gonna get a Wii!
Even Reggie was there to greet some of the people waiting in line to get the Nintendo Wii, and people had already been queuing for days beforehand. And when the doors finally opened at midnight, Reggie actually put the first sale through the register.
There's over 2,000 people out there right now. We have over 2,000 Wiis here in the store, so we're going to have a great event. We're feeling good. Everyone's been having a great time, and I'm getting ready to sell the first system.
And there's so many incredible photos and news stories from this event, and it just seems like such an exciting time to be a Nintendo fan and to be looking forward to the future of gaming too. And the sales after the launch in the United States were just insane, by far the fastest sales of any video game system ever. In fact, for the first 8 days they sold over 600,000 consoles, which equates to one Wii console being sold every single second for 8 days straight. That is just insane. And then next was the launch in Japan. It doesn't look like there was any crazy big events put on like there was in America, but thousands were queuing up around the country to get into the different electronic stores that were selling it on launch day, and online pre-orders for the console sold out immediately. Interestingly, unlike other regions around the world, in Japan it didn't actually come with Wii Sports as a pack-in title, and this is something that's been brought to light again more recently, where we found out that Reggie was actually very instrumental into bundling Wii Sports with the Nintendo Wii over in America and Europe. And he really had to fight for that, and you can see that his influence isn't around at Nintendo today, because the Switch 2 doesn't come with a pack-in game, even though everyone says that Welcome Tour should have been a pack-in, but I guess it's profit over everything else these days. Let's move on and see what the launch was like here in the UK. Before the launch here in the UK, Nintendo put on a tour across the country in over 60 different locations where people could go and experience the Wii before it was released. And the interesting thing about these events is the fact that they were all set out like modular house sets with different rooms all showing off various different ways of playing the console. And just like Japan and America, the console sold out here instantly, and some pre-orders weren't even being fulfilled until after Christmas, which put a lot of families under pressure to get the systems before Christmas Day. I found this news broadcast from the time from the BBC where you can see just the insane hype around the system here at launch. And just like today, some things never changed. There was already people buying the console and then putting them straight back on eBay for twice the price, of course. And of course, I've been talking about how excited I personally was for the launch of the system here, and I actually rooted through my magazine collection and had a look at some of those pre-launch issues here. And it was just so exciting for me back then to read all about the system from when it was first revealed. Here I've got this one where it announces it as the Revolution all the way up until launch day, and I've got the launch day editions here. There's this official buyer's guide, there's a magazine all about Mii's, which is something that I would love to cover in the future as well, because the Wii was much more than just a new console. It had a completely brand new operating system and so many new ideas for all the different software and different philosophies of game design as well, which definitely deserve their own episode. Here's the launch day issue of the Wii here in the UK. So exciting to see these again after so long as well. Here's another one from a few years prior where they're talking about the Revolution again. Here's another launch day issue from the UK, this time a preview of Red Steel. And here's one from Edge magazine, which I think has a really cool cover. Look how nice that is. And this is obviously based on that E3 trailer. So it was such an exciting time to be a Nintendo fan, and it brings back so many great memories, taking a look over some of these old magazine articles too. And of course I got my system on day one, thankfully, and I remember running home after school to play it straight away, and I was just obsessed. And of course that's when I set up my YouTube channel as well, and I used to go by the name Nintendo Wii, so, and if that doesn't tell you just how excited I was for this console, then I don't know what will. But there's still a bunch of other regions around the world to take a look at that came in the years to follow. So there isn't too much that differentiates the consoles in the different regions, unlike there was with the previous systems, which makes this kind of less exciting in terms of a launch and rollout, but it did actually end up being sold in a lot more regions, which is very good compared to the GameCube. So it launched in South Africa on the 28th of September 2007, and then it took another year to arrive in South Korea, which landed on the 26th of April 2008, followed by Taiwan on the 12th of July 2008. Argentina got it next on the 26th of March 2008, and then finally India got their first official Nintendo console release in September that year, and then finally Hong Kong got their version of the system in 2009 in December. And there again were plans for the system to release in China as well under the iQ brand, but just like the GameCube before it, that never saw the light of day. And unlike the GameCube, unfortunately, I can't find any leaked information about whether this system would have been different or not either. But that wasn't the final release for the Wii though. There was also this that's been sitting above the Wii box the whole time, the Wii Mini, and this is a really interesting console for a few reasons. First of all, it never actually got a release in Japan, which is very unusual for a Nintendo system. It actually first released exclusively in Canada, and it came out in Canada on the 7th of July 2012, and it was an exclusive there all the way up until March 15th, 2013, where it came out here in the UK, and I've got the UK edition of the console here, and I really like the design of it. It's very much more toy-like than the original Wii, but I actually really like it. It's very sleek. I love the red and black colour scheme. It's interesting because the disk drive actually lifts up instead of using the insertion method. Obviously, it's a lot cheaper to do it this way. It also removed basically every feature from the Wii that wasn't just playing games, but for what it is, I really do like it. And for comparison, because I kind of forgot to show it off earlier, here's my original Wii. As you can see, it has seen better days. It is just covered in very old, grubby stickers. It's lost the GameCube flap at the top, it's lost the SD flap, it's lost the stand, but it still works. It's still got all my original saves on it, and it's got all my original WiiWare and Virtual Console downloads, and I absolutely love it. I'm so glad it still works. But back on the topic of the Wii Mini, it did also come out in one other region, and that was North America, where it finally got a release on November 17th, 2013, and it was actually bundled with Mario Kart Wii there as well. And there aren't actually any sales figures specifically for the Wii Mini, but by working out what they announced originally and the final numbers for the Wii, which were actually announced after the original Wii stopped production, we can work out that roughly only 1.7 to 2 million units of the Wii Mini were ever sold, compared to the original Wii, which sold a massive 101 million, or around 100 million if you take away the Wii Mini. And to finish this video, I thought it would be really interesting to show that graph again that I showed at the start of Nintendo's downfall with and without the Wii. It's just insane, the comeback that Nintendo managed to have this generation. And just for fun, and to show that the trend would have still continued, because technically the Wii Mini came out after the Wii U, which is very interesting in its own right. But if you put that in diagram form and get rid of the Wii, you can actually see that it lines up perfectly with the original trajectory that Nintendo was on. So I just thought that was kind of funny, and that's a great place to end this episode. I really hope you enjoyed taking a trip down memory lane and seeing how Nintendo launched the Wii and the revolution. Join me next time, of course, where we'll take a look at the Wii U, which is another very fascinating console by Nintendo. And if you enjoyed this and want to see the previous video, click up here and check out the video all about the Nintendo GameCube. Thank you so much for watching, subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all again very soon. Goodbye.